we put together a little portfolio, a photographic portfolio, which I sent out, one for Beth and one for me. A strange story. Got a call from somebody called Golden Press, 686 Madison Avenue. I called Henry Pitts, my former teacher, and I said, Henry, what is Golden Press? He said, I don't know what it is, but go see him. And so Beth and I took our portfolios and we're walking down Madison Avenue, and here's 685 Zsa Zsa Gabor's jewelry store. We walked upstairs, and there were two secretaries, a room with a curtain. The curtain parted, and Mr. Duplay came out, who was the art director, and he disappeared with the portfolio. And I got to talking to the secretary, and I said, how did you ever get our name? And she said, we were cleaning out our desk drawer, and we came up with this. And there was our portfolio.
How many illustrations are in that book?
I think there's 3,000. It took us almost 3 years to do it.
And how did you do each illustration? Did you have to research it, or?
Yes. My wife kept a picture file. We had quite a collection, which I'm now just throwing out. Albrecht Dürer did the first drawing of a rhinoceros, and before that, nobody knew what a rhinoceros looked like. His was a rhinoceros for the world.
My name is John Thornton, and since 2007, I've been making movies about artists with a connection to Philadelphia. On January 11th, I met for lunch in Wayne with members of an art class whose beloved teacher is a 98-year-old illustrator named Joe Krush. You're taking liberties with your teacher.
Oh, I know. Harassment. That's sexual harassment.
What can you do with a class like that?
Student Linda Finkelstein wrote me, I've been a student in Joe's class at Mainline School Night for about 18 years. I started studying painting and drawing in a class with Joe and his late wife Beth in 1998. They were great teachers, and I loved the way they interacted with each other with such care, humor, and respect. Over the years, there have always been new students, and there is a core group of admirers who just love Joe and keep signing up for class. Last summer, another student, Gloria Ives, sent me an email saying, Joe needs his own documentary.
Hi, I'm Gloria Ives.
And how long have you been taking classes from Joe?
I think it's between 5 and 7 years. I've lost track.
So you're one of the newer members?
One of the newer out of this group, yeah, because a lot of folks have been with him for like 15 years.
Joe has just a lifetime of experience, and so many of us love him so much and follow him. What he teaches in his class is that life is art. Everything he says, I write it down, and it feels like it's just all a metaphor. And so I just feel like somebody needed to capture it. I just thought he needed to be celebrated and recognized.
I'm John Gibson, one of Joe Krush's disciples. I moved back home again about 4 years ago, went over to Mainline School Night to sign up for bridge lessons. Over the desk was a pen and ink done by Joe Krush. I recognized his work immediately because when I was a youngster, my two favorite children's books were Gone Away Lake and Return to Gone Away. He and his wife had illustrated them, and I still have those books because they meant so much to me. He also did The Borrowers and a ton of other stuff. I knew the work, and I said to the man at the desk, "That's Joe Krush's work." And he said, "Yes, he teaches here." And I said, "Well, he must be 110. And he said, "Well, no, but close." So I immediately signed up for classes and have been coming ever since.
After lunch, I went to Joe's house and filmed him. He was so amazing in his graciousness, the way he spoke, and his total recall of events from over 70 years ago.
My name is Joe Krush, and I'm a nobody. Was born in Camden, New Jersey, 1918. Went to public schools, graduated from high school, which at the time was one of the three best high schools in the United States. I graduated from the Museum School of Art in Philadelphia for 4 years. Marvelous teachers who I knew their whole lifetime. As a matter of fact, I attended some of their funerals. Morris Blackburn, Struans, at her order. Henry Pitts was a friend the whole 4 years. I knew Henry and I knew his family. I was a graduate of the same school in the class of 1918. He was quite a writer and quite an illustrator also. Mary B. Sweeney was first-year teacher, and I must say she impressed us. Mary Sweeney was a gem. I can remember and came across on a ferry and walked up to Broad and Pine, up the marble steps into the front of the building, into the room where I paid my money. The next day, the first class was a class in lettering with Raymond Ballinger, a well-known letterer. And there was this gorgeous creature with red hair. I didn't know her very well, but it was only after one class with Mary Sweeney that I knew who the shining light in that class was. If Mary Sweeney wanted to show any visitor what the model looked like, it was always Beth's drawing that she held up. But on the other hand, what you strove for was to have your drawing picked up by Mary Sweeney for her collection. 5 or 6 years later, I met a man on the street. He said, "Oh, I remember your drawing in Mary Sweeney's collection." I was well prepared for what followed the rest of my life, and Mary Sweeney was responsible for it.
Joe, you said you didn't use models.
No.
What about the hands?
Yeah. We were well trained.
When you went to art school, did they have anatomy classes and
Yes,
a lot of life
indeed. I had a
drawing?
year of anatomy. And the examination at the end of the year was a 6-foot length of wrapping paper. And you drew the skeleton and 220 muscles, where they started, where they ended, and where they crossed. I think I could almost do it now with a little brushing up.
What about that day that you walked with Beth down by the river for the picnic? Your first
Oh,
picnic?
yes. Well, it's interesting. The times are different now. I go to Conestoga in Harran High School, and I know what the young people are like. At this time, there was no hanky-panky. A friendship was a friendship. I was told that we were always an item at school, but there was never any hokey-pokey. I can remember, however, the first time I kissed her. We were out painting watercolors, and it was along the Cooper River where it enters into the Delaware. And it was a long path, and we were all loaded down with our drawing boards and paper and paint boxes and water jars. And I turned around, and there she was, and she was close, and I kissed her. And I say, the wind off the Delaware never felt so soft. She was beautiful, and she didn't resist my intention. But she was a very straight-laced person. We graduated from school, and we did share a studio. We both started out together. Her home was in 40 Fort, PA. She was living at a YMCA in Philadelphia, and she was doing work for the Religious Houses, Westminster Press. She was very big in Jack and Jill. They loved her. And as a matter of fact, I think she sort of set a style for Jack and Jill.
What about when you decided to get married?
Well, it's funny. I never asked her to marry me. I just said, I think we should get married. And the news of December the 7th, the bombing of, and we thought, no, we can't do it now. This is not a good time. So I went into the service, and 6 months later, it was a long time to be away from each other. We decided to marry. We were at Fort Meade, and the county seat was Annapolis, Maryland. And I remember bribing my staff sergeant a bottle of black and white whiskey to give me a pass. I went to Annapolis and made application for my license, which would be picked up a week later. The day we were married a week later, I know Beth worked all night and delivered a job and got on the train and was coming down to pick up the license. And the train was late, and it looked like there would be no marriage license. Some fortunate things had happened to us. She sat next to a naval officer's wife. She said, "Don't worry, dear, I'll get you there in time. I have a car." And sure enough, she picked up the license, and on the way back to Fort Meade by bus, 2 sailors tried to pick her up. And then we were married by a Lutheran chaplain who tried to talk us out of it. And my wife, a very calm person, suddenly drew herself up and said, "Sir, if you think this is a fly-by-night marriage, you're mistaken. We've known each other for 7 years." And boom, it was an accomplished fact. And we were married for 67 years before she died. I ended up, right before the war, having a studio in Camden where I did a lot of work for RCA, album covers, etc. I must have done, over a period of 11 years, 30 or 40 album covers. Immediately draft notices and found myself facing the Army. Decided I'd take my portfolio and go down to the Navy. I would rather be in the Navy, and they were not interested in me. But they gave me a number to call at Governor's Island in New York, where they were soliciting artists, etc., for a camouflage battalion. And I called these people up, and they signed me up. So I enlisted in the Army by telephone, which is very unusual. And I found myself at Fort Dix with the draftees. But the draftees came and left, and nobody seemed to pay any attention to me. I was there for about 2 weeks, and eventually a young lieutenant drove up and said, "Do you Krush?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Come with me." Why does a lieutenant come and pick me up and take me to the train? I have a uniform that doesn't even fit. Anyway, we get in the train, and I go to Fort Meade, Maryland, to meet my unit. The whole train load gets off, and where are we? Where are we? Where are we? And there was a young lieutenant to pick me up and take me to the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion. My serial number 120-48894. 6 months later, I have a commanding officer who was determined that I would go to Officer Candidate School, and I took my exam and I entered the engineer school. I can't add two and two together, but I entered the engineer school with a class of reservists from Texas A&M. So I think that Texas A&M is my alma mater. And went through 90 days, being a 90-day wonder. And this is the midst of the war. We were sworn in, and lo and behold, I'm assigned to teach at the engineer school in Fort Belvoir. Hallelujah, this is like heaven. This just doesn't happen to me. I say, I'm a nobody. And I was there at the engineer school teaching camouflage. But 15 months later, I had a commanding officer. In the meantime, let's just let it ring. In the meantime, that's just the phone, it'll pass.
Sorry, Joe, sorry. We're going to interrupt this movie so that the viewers can learn a little bit more about the caller, your wonderful son, Jay.
Son Jay was a product of many pregnancies. My wife was not gifted with childbearing.
He was precious when he arrived. A good kid, works hard, a good man. He lives in Philadelphia because he teaches at Temple. He plays with the ballet orchestra. He plays with a brass quintet. He played all over the world. About 5 years ago, they won a Grammy. He sticks to whatever he's trying to do. He does very well. I couldn't want more. Does the dishes for me always. I hate doing dishes. He started to play the tuba when he was 6 or 7 years old, and he's been playing it his whole lifetime.
And I have a picture of my father in a band uniform. And we had Jay put the hat on, I think. When he was in 4th grade, he became the tuba player in the local grammar school. And interest in writing music, entering all the competitions.
He enjoyed building model airplanes, had a rocket club in high school, of course played in the bands in primary, junior, and high school, won awards for his musicianship from Drexel. Tuba Christmas was started by a man in Indiana who thought it would be a good idea to get tuba players together and let people hear tuba players. They have them all over the country. The man who started it is now gone, but tuba players are like glue, and they stick together. Jay does it on his own. He puts out a call for tuba players. This last year, 130 tuba players showed up on Christmas. They come from all over, and once they start to do it, they like it, and they keep coming back. He's done it for, I think over 10 years. He's now 63 years old, and he gets nothing out of it except a lot of work.
Sounds like a wonderful guy.
Yeah, he is. He's a marvelous man.
Now back to our regularly scheduled movie. It's the commanding officer.
In the meantime, this new commanding officer who must have had a lot of drag, because suddenly we have 5 L-5 Stinson Sentinel airplanes. And I'm put in charge of the airport because I do airplanes. Got myself a non-rated observer classification. So I hung out of the airplane with a parachute and a camera and took pictures of the work that our students were doing. 15 months passed, and the same commanding officer said he's thinking of leaving. I went with Major Cheek to Washington, D.C. I was going to go to Chongqing, China with Morale Operations Group. And I found out that there was a part of OSS called Presentation Incorporated. I took my portfolio, and yes, they liked my work, and they would like to have me. And suddenly I find myself working on something called UN. Later I found out they were talking about a thing called the United Nations Conference on International Organization, San Francisco. Found myself working on a seal of something. I had to draw leaves around a world. That's something I did. And preparing booklets. I must say there wasn't anything they handed me that I was not able to do. I was well trained. I knew how to letter. I knew how to spec type. I knew how to do separation drawings. I had marvelous teachers. And a month later, I find myself with $200 from U.S. Army to go out and buy civilian clothes, going to San Francisco with the presentation department. Arrived at San Francisco, and my bunkmate was my boss, Donald McLaughlin, who originally designed the UN seal. Oh, he was a very knowledgeable fellow. And there wasn't anything he gave me or asked me to do that I was not able to handle. All kinds of posters and booklets and signs, even a thank you declaration to the mayor of San Francisco, which I lettered, etc. And finally worked on the actual charter. And suddenly they realized that there was no cover for the charter. And I heard the clarion call, "Krush, we need a cover." And an hour and a half later, we had designed a very simple cover. The next morning, it appeared all done in leather. Funny little instance, the Chinese translation had not arrived, printed. And they hired a Chinese calligrapher, 2 helpers. And this man sat in the attic of the Opera House and hand-lettered the charter. And he was magnificent. And we sat up all night lining pencil lines on beautiful paper. And he had an eye like a hawk. He could look at the piece of paper and say, no good. The lines were not perfect. By morning, he had done the whole thing. The presentation was responsible for setting up the whole signing ceremony. After it was all finished, the charter came back to us with an armed guard and white gloves. We erased all the pencil lines that the men had used to sign their names. And it wasn't but a short time later that I was told, you get ready because you're going to go to Nuremberg, to the war trials. I went to London first. Our job was to facilitate the physical running of the Nuremberg trials. We had nothing to do with the legal end of it. When the major left, he also took 4 architects with him. I know one, Lieutenant Kiley, was made a captain and was given a jeep, a driver, and carte blanche to go anywhere in Germany. He apparently toured Germany to find a building which could handle the Nuremberg trials. A normal courtroom were not set up for 24 defendants, plus 24 lawyers, plus 9 judges and all their help, the press, whatever you need. It made sense that Nuremberg would be a good place. The Reichsparteitag, which was the big Nuremberg Nazi party at Nuremberg. And I think he probably brought this up to Justice Jackson. Nuremberg was selected. We got to Nuremberg at least a month before it all took place. Captain Cutler, who was responsible for the instant translation at the United Nations, and he again was here at Nuremberg doing the same thing. And I had an office on the 2nd floor just down the hall. The courtroom was all redesigned with all the proper number of chairs and seats. We saw all of the furniture. It was magnificent. I should have realized that the 4 architects probably were responsible for redesigning the inside of the courtroom, and OSS was responsible for building all this stuff. Because in Nuremberg itself, there was not a carpenter shop. There was certainly not a hardware store. I had to do an awful lot of looking around to find a printer because I was responsible for making passes and membership cards and everything else that had to do with getting into the trials itself. And after the trial started, we had the problem of presenting evidence. Now, you have to realize this is 70 years ago, and there is no such thing as Xerox. So that we had to actually redraw graphs on 4x8 panels that came up from the cellar and showed the court what they were talking about. Eventually the trial started. No, I did not go into the court. You could get into that room with a spoon. It was full of very important people. But I did go down the hall and look out a window and look down on the 24 defendants. I did see Hermann Goering and Hess and Ribbentrop. I saw them all. It surprised me that I didn't want to spit on them. But they looked like businessmen to me. I couldn't tell them from anybody.
I heard that you designed the Nuremberg passes and you used the colors of yellow and black that the Jews had to wear under the Nazi regime.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell that story?
I lived through the Holocaust, so I know the Jews are all printed with yellow and black, and I thought it would be appropriate. I tried to work in a Star of David, but I couldn't do it without being very obvious. Nuremberg, I must say, I thought it smelled of death and sauerkraut, but that's kind of weird to say. I did spend a lot of my time off in the old town. We lived in a German perfumer's house next to Justice Jackson's house in a little town called Fürth. Fürth was not destroyed, but Nuremberg was blown to hell.
Did you do drawings of Germany, of the ruins?
We didn't have much time to do drawings. We had our work to do. I had a sketchbook which I tried to keep, which was impossible. I did some drawings of the Russian legal people. It was interesting. When we first got to Nuremberg, I think the United States was bending over backwards to create a fine impression. If you were attached to the trial for the first couple of days, you were not assigned a billet, and you were sent to the Grand Hotel. And this was the first big surprise. I walked into the dining room, and there were waiters with tails, white ties, and white linen tablecloth, silverware, and steak. And I think this was the United States trying to impress everybody who came to the trial. Incidentally, the hotel had the whole front of it blown out, but it was still operating.
Did you see people that were displaced and that kind of thing?
Yes.
What were they like?
Harried people trying to get home. Truckloads of people, people with bicycles, people pulling carts, families. I remember when we were leaving Nuremberg, we had to take a train to Frankfurt, and a freight train was going through. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun was setting, and there was a freight car going by with the door open, and a woman was ready to give birth on board the freight car, and she was a long way from home. Before the trial ended, I was sent home. I was in London on VJ Day when they turned the lights on in the street, and I saw families walking their children out under seeing the street lights. It was marvelous. OSS went out of business the 30th of November. We were transient people, and we had to get back to Washington by the 11th of December. The officers traveled in a separate train, and the enlisted men. And we were all very close. And I said, if I get to Frankfurt before you do, I'll go to headquarters and get your orders to get home. And fortunately, our train arrived early, and a young lieutenant said, oh, I can't give you your men's orders. I need copies of their orders. And I said, wait a minute. I ran out the front door, and a bus is going by with my 11 men on it. Got onto the back end of the bus, grabbed their orders. That evening, we were at Camp Home Run in Le Havre. We were not very welcome in Le Havre because we'd accidentally dropped some bombs on Midtown Le Havre. But we were stationed waiting for a boat in one of the channel ports, cannons and ammunition, and called Camp Home Run. Had a drawbridge, the whole bit. It was a German emplacement. Eventually we got on a boat, and it was, I think, 5 days later that we arrived in Boston. We were going like this. There were still problems with U-boats, etc., despite the fact that there were, quote, no wars going on. But there were always those people who had not gotten the word and were still being enemies. And landed in Boston, and boom, that night we were in Washington. I was ready to get out after almost 4 years in the Army. I went to the Pentagon, met a young lieutenant. She said, "Oh, you've been in grade a long time. You need promoting. Well, you promote me and I'll bring you a box of candy," which I did, and I was promoted to captain. I had 3 months leave coming to me, so I enjoyed being a captain for 3 months, and then I was out of the Army, but I had a job waiting for me in the State Department, which is, thank you, OSS, at work. I was at the State Department for about 4 or 5 months, but basically I was a freelance. In the meantime, my wife, who is also an illustrator, was busy keeping up home ties, doing work for all the religious houses. When I began teaching at the engineer school, I was able to live off the post so she could live with me. And she continued to live all the time I was overseas, etc. Basically, we decided we were going to do what we were trained to do, and we were going to do books. And I did my first book in Alexandria, Virginia, called Windwagon Smith and Other Tales by Wilbur Schramm. These were a compilation of stories from the Saturday Evening Post. It was well received and became the beginning of our future as book illustrators. We were in Alexandria for 4 or 5 months and moved back to our digs in Camden, New Jersey, which were very inadequate, and began looking around for a place to live, and finally found this house, which was a summer house. This house, when we bought it, had 8 bedrooms. It sat on a high hill, and it wasn't only until later I found out one day, looking out the studio in the attic, that I could see Reading, which is 50 miles away, right up the valley. I've enjoyed living here for 69 years. My wife passed away 9 years ago. She's still with me. Ours was an unusual relationship because we occasionally worked together and we worked separately depending on whose job it was. But we always had something to do with sticking our oar into the other person's work. I guess we've done about 50 books. When we got a manuscript to do, we both read the manuscripts separately, and then we both put down what we thought should be illustrated, and then we would sit and have a conference. Normally, I think we agreed on most cases, and then Beth would set the costumes and the people, and I would do the compositions, do the layout for the entire book. I know that there were times when I dipped into what she was doing, and she dipped into things that I was doing. And we were living together. You were given the words, and you knew how many pages there were in the book, and you divided the words up into chapters, and you would know how much space you had to do for drawings. And then we usually picked the climax of the story and put it in the middle of the book, so that we're up to a climax and then trailed off. Generally, the climax was a double-page spread. When you lay the book out, you want to make certain that the pictures make you go the next page. So design has a direction. It's not obvious, but it's there.
Did you make multiple sketches and then pick the one you liked, or you just
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was never the first thing that came to our mind. It was always rework it. A better way to show it.
Talk about how you decided to do The Borrowers.
We were working for Harcourt Brace with Margaret McEldory, who was a well-known editor. She said, "I have a manuscript that just came from London. Would you like to read it?" And nobody has read this. It was an interesting story, and I stayed up all night and read the book. Called her the next morning and said, Margaret, this is a winner. You've got a real winner here. She said, why don't you do a sample drawing? And boom, she liked it. And she said, do it. I don't think we ever submitted sketches or anything. I think we just did drawings. Fortunately, we were rebuilding an old house, this old house, because it was not livable when we bought it. So I knew pretty much how old houses were built, and the house when we bought it was completely furnished. It was kind of spooky because water had run through a 10-foot hole in the roof. All the wallpaper was festooned like drapery all over the house. Anyway, because of our knowledge of how the old house was built, it was a lot easier to come up with some of these pictures. The information that we used in the drawing of under the floors and stuff. I was fortunate in having a father, totally uneducated, who knew how everything worked. As a boy, I used to help him fix floors, and he was a marvelous man. I know as an 11-year-old, he worked as a breaker boy in the mines, and he was apprenticed to a tinsmith in Shenandoah, PA. I have his letter of recommendation. His instructor said he recommends him to the trade, and I remember the last line. It said, he is a gentleman, and he was. I did album covers for about 4 years after I came back from the service, and a whole host of other work. Teaching, I taught at the Philadelphia College 16 years. My wife eventually became chairman of the illustration department at Moore College of Art. She was there 22 years. I taught a little at Moore. I taught at Arcadia for a year, mostly freelance, but also taught on the side. I find teaching very exhilarating. I love the people. I've gotten to the point where I can see the wheels going around in their head. I think I know what they're going to do next.
What class do you teach?
Painting and drawing. Anything they want to do, because there isn't much I haven't done in my lifetime. I've done etching, lithography, silkscreen, painting, gesso, underpainting, egg tempera. I've done them all. But this is how we prepared a black and white and color. The lettering went up here.
Just gorgeous.
Okay.
With,
I did the black and white drawing first, and then we did the color. And the reason for this is that if you did the black and white and did it with the color, when they shot it through the screen,
it would be
black
gray.
and white would be dots, and they'd break up the black and white.
Yeah.
So I always did a separate black and white plate. If I see that they're going a certain way, I make these other things known to them so that if they want to pursue it, they can. One of the goals that I set for the class is I would like for you, when you pick up a pencil, to have it second nature. You don't think of anything of going to pick up the pencil to do the drawing. You just pick up a pencil and you draw it. And also to be observant. To notice, even watching TV, especially weather girls, it's interesting. The costume that the weather women, always very pretty, wear has something to do with the compositions, and usually it has to do with the space between their knees and the bottom of the screen. The cameramen are now lowering the camera so that you don't have the problem of knees and odd spaces that have nothing to do with weather. That's the kind of thinking I like. I give an example of my own education. Doing the album covers, I'm confronted with other people who are magnificent with lettering. I've always been a good letterer, but I was never trained as a letterer. If I would see some lettering, I would tear it out and put it in a pamphlet. At the end of the week, I would put it aside, and then the next week I would start again and do it for 3 weeks in a row. And then at the end of 3 weeks, I looked at the different lettering and how much my ideas of lettering had changed over 3 weeks. Only by being confronted with it, you're aware of it. And I think that's what I try to impart to them. Of course, I tell a lot of stories. And of course, they know I'm 100% right 2% of the time.
We're getting some of your fans to be in the movie
Yes.
now.
I shouldn't tell you this, but sometimes some students are excellent. They are very good. And yet other students come and don't know which end of the pencil to sharpen.
And they still don't leave. They keep coming.
But they're a marvelous group of people. They do things way beyond what I have planned, like meeting for lunches and going to museums.
What have you guys learned from the class?
What a gentleman Joe is. He's an incredible gentleman, and he's a wonderful teacher. I've learned a lot about drawing and about illustration, and we always have a model. No one leaves this class. We have taken this class for a number of years, and no one leaves.
I don't understand it. But
And no matter what your level is, he makes you feel like you've accomplished something.
they are. They don't know it. They really are.
Which one of you guys has been in the class the longest?
I think
Linda.
I have.
How many years?
In 1998, I took 2 classes at Mainline School Night. 1999, I came in for the same class.
Yes.
Joe and Beth were there, and they said they were taking over from whoever the teacher was. I had liked that other teacher, so I was a little disappointed, but they made up for it. They were both fantastic teachers, and I loved the way you guys worked together, and you were so respectful of each other and had so much fun with each other. It was very inspiring.
Well, it was a nice marriage.
And Beth was a lovely woman
She
also.
was.
She was very kind and great to be around, and she really taught us a lot.
This was a painting done by Alex Ting.
Oh, I know Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the painting is about yay big. It's a big painting.
Joe
Of course, I'll
was
never
fantastic.
forgive her for cutting the end of my tugboat off. And then again, I can see where she was using artistic license to composition-wise.
Yeah.
Alex told me that she learned to draw by taking Beth and Joe's pictures and tracing them when she was a child. That
Wow.
was one of the ways she
It's
learned to draw.
interesting, when I first went to visit Alex Ting, she had pictures that we had drawn on the wall, which is very unusual, considering all the fine pictures that there are in the world.
Well, I think Alex is not the only person who saw your books as a child and loved them.
Yes. I got this letter from a young boy who liked the drawings that he had seen in a book that he was reading that we had done. He said his name was Noble Brigham. He was 11. He had a sister, Flora, who was 7. And he gave me a phone number, and he sounded like an interesting young man. So I called him up. Indeed, a nice young man. I said, Noble, why don't you come and visit me? Oh, yes. And 2 weeks later, up the driveway came a 4-door Mini Cooper. And out came Daddy, David, Mother Holly, Flora, and Noble. Daddy was... He's had it. A businessman, needed a shave. Summertime. And they all came into the house, and he handed me his card, and I put it in my pocket. And we came in, and I made popcorn, and we all ate popcorn. In the middle of the conversation, I reach into my pocket, and I get out the card. It said, David Brigham, Ph.D. and CEO, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. So that's how I got to meet the president of the Academy, through Noble. I've known Noble since he's been 11. He's now 15 years old. And I usually get 1 phone call a week from Noble.
I'm Noble Brigham. Joe Krush is a great friend. I love his artwork. I was really enamored with his and his wife's intricate pen and ink drawings, like in The Borrowers. The detail and quality of their work. I've been friends with him for about 4 years. I'll call about every weekend on Saturday or Sunday night, and we will visit for 15 minutes or so. We go out to visit him at his house pretty often. It's always interesting to talk to him. He has great stories. He'll talk about his artwork, growing up in Camden, ice skating costumes he and his wife used to make.
I was also invited to show at the Academy. I've been around 70 years and nobody's ever invited me to show anything. I told Noble, I said, I think you're the reason I'm showing at the Academy. He said, I had nothing to do with it. they've started to institute an illustration course at the Academy. Some of their faculty came out and talked to me about my opinions of the curriculum, etc. But we do have an illustration show at the Academy, and I have 2 pieces in it. So
Excellent.
I think we had a reputation for researching our stories very well. And I got some assignments with the Reader's Digest that were very unusual. A group of men in the Vietnam War, POWs, were permitted by the Vietnamese to get together to sing Christmas carols. I got the story to do, couldn't find any Vietnamese prisoners of war. Finally found one man in Blackwood, New Jersey, who was the most highly decorated Air Force officer. Called him up. I knew of a place to have breakfast. I got there with my portfolio, and eventually a man came in, and I said, "Are you Colonel Dramese?" He said, "Oh no, you're talking about that man who made the American flag out of the threads of his dressing gown." And I thought, oh boy. Sooner or later came in the most dapper man I'd seen in a long time. And I said, "You look exactly like a colonel." He said, "Are you Joe Krush?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You look exactly like an artist." And then he took me in and we had breakfast. And he not only knew this story, I think he was part of it. And he described cracks in the wall and how high the windows were and what he saw out the windows. He tried to escape 5 times and was caught 5 times. I think he was a POW for 5 years. And needless to say, I think it affected him.
I'm 64. Do you have any health tips for us young whippersnappers?
It's funny, but I've ice skated my whole lifetime. And at one time, I knew 3 people who were over 100 years old, and they were all ice skaters. So I don't know whether I can attribute being an ice skater or not.
Did Beth ice skate with you? Didn't
Yes,
you
I was basically a figure skater my whole lifetime. I don't brag about it, but in 1941, I became the Philadelphia novice figure skater in the Philadelphia Championship. I don't repeat that often. But I still belong to the Philadelphia Skating Club over 60 years now. I don't skate anymore. When we were 75, we decided to give up skating. I'm sorry I did, because I think I would still enjoy it. I liked to swim when I did swim. When we worked night and day. I kept pretty weird hours. Work all night and catch a train to New York and come back that same afternoon, come home and fall dead asleep for 24 hours. But I guess that's the way freelancing is.
Are you grateful for the life you led as an artist?
Oh, I think so. I've met a lot of marvelous people teaching. I've met a lot of students who I've continued to remember and know, and they remember me. Yes, I think I enjoyed my career as an artist. I had intended when I was in high school to become a manual arts teacher, an art teacher who knew this school, museum school, convinced me that I should go there, and I think it was a good idea. Met other people, knew for a long time. I think I've probably outlived all of them. I suppose it would have been wise to get a job which paid a pension.
The books that we did, these were work for hire. These were not royalty books.
Living on what we made, I expect I'll run out of money eventually. But outside of that, why? That's the only thing that worries me.
If you had to pick one project that you did that you're most proud of, what might that one be?
Probably the drawings for the borrowers, which is still in existence, and it doesn't pay me any money, but it's given my family a nice reputation.
Did you both draw on the same drawing?
No, I did the final drawings.
Somebody told me they thought that Beth did the people and you did the...
She may have worked on sketches for the people, but I did the final drawings. You couldn't do that to a book. You can't do that. It has to look like the same person drew the book. It was a strange relationship. I have to explain it. We did work together, but we worked separately, and we were both able to carry on books in our own name. In other words, there's a whole series of books that Beth did, which I had nothing to do with. I say had nothing to do with, which is not true, because she would ask me to criticize a drawing, or ask me for ideas, or ask me to do a sketch for something, and vice versa. Beth has credit on her books, and I have credit on my books, and sometimes the editors wanted us to work together.
As a very happily married man, do you have any tips on how to have a good marriage?
Well, Beth was always right. I think we both respected each other. We were very good friends from almost the first day at art school. I don't think our families ever got together because they lived so far apart. We certainly got along together, and I enjoyed what she did, and she enjoyed what I did. There was never any problem. We had arguments. I gave her a hard time, but she always forgave me. But she was always right.
When you were talking to me on camera, you had your hand on a table, and on top of that table...
Yes, that was Beth.
Okay. You really do keep her close to you.
Yes, she's with me right now.
Must have been a great joy to you to have such a long, wonderful relationship.
Well, it was totally unexpected, and just happened. As a matter of fact, being 98 is due to me, too, because I've outlived my parents by 28 years. They were both gone at 68. They were very hardworking people, and I think we were very poor, and we didn't know it. I say I came from a generation that was taught how to cut cardboard to fit the holes in the bottom of our soles of our shoes, and that's true. Worked hard, and I think we tried to do right. We never cheated anybody. We couldn't do a job. We said so. We wouldn't take it. I suppose I could have been a better manager, a better man. I don't know.
Noble Brigham, what kind of man do you think Joe Krush is?
He's a very kind, very cheerful and upbeat person. He's always happy to hear from you. He's quiet, very intelligent. He questions things. He's interested in religion. He was raised Catholic. Beth was Methodist. He goes to an adult Sunday school class at a Methodist church. He likes to read a lot. He'll read books about local history and religious philosophy. He's very good at building model airplanes. He'll build gliders, and he works with the Science Olympiad program. He'll go to schools on the main line a couple days a week and work with students there through the Science Olympiad program, building gliders and all sorts of things that fly. He's a modest person. He really doesn't talk about the great success and how much his work is admired by people in his field. I'm not sure if he really realizes how special the things he's done are. He's just a great person.
Here are some of the Joe Krush quotes that Gloria Ives wrote down in her sketchbook. Before you begin, decide what it is you want to say. If I can just make you think, that's what counts. The spirit happens immediately, as soon as you begin. You can't add the spirit at the end. Everything is relative. It's neither good nor bad, but it explains things. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. When something happens to you, try to figure out why. Decide what you want to say with your life. When you know how to draw, you know how to see. And when you learn how to see, you'll learn so much about people. You'll broaden your scope. We are all here to broaden ourselves.